Chapter 4 Dreams of Doyle. Day faded into night as Marlowe helped with chores around the village the rest of the day, eventually returning to Hef, who, instead of finding more work for the counselor, assigned him a hut to rest in until morning. The Polly had helped enough for today, the Sherpa said, waving him out the door just as fast as he'd arrived. So Mar shuffled to the vacant hut on the outside of the village and pushed the door aside. It fell unhinged against the wall. He stepped under the woven grass roof around it, setting it back in place with a tisk of unamusement. His eyes had trouble adjusting to the dark, even with the few pokes of starlight coming through the gaps in the walls and ceiling. He snapped, igniting a quiet flame. Orange light brightened the interior, revealing walls decorated with letters and sketches pasted up with some dark, sappy substance. He reached for one and plucked it off the vine. Pulpy paper tore away from the dark-colored mark behind it, like sealing wax. His eyes skimmed the scrawlings. "To my sweet Rosalind," he muttered, growing an eager smile. He reached for the others on the wall, taking one sketch of a woman, what looked like a woman, in a dressy coat that reminded him of the city. The ornery smile hidden away in this simple drawing's details sent his mind on a wild goose chase, one where the goose was that snarly red woman with whom he often spread exchanges of the B-word. He reached for another letter, spilling its guts about all the lonely nights its author had professed, reading torment, choking up the isolation and despair in the words. At the parting signature, "With dreadful longing regards, your mountain, Titanus." He blinked hard and shuffled the papers so the backs were face up. The walls felt like they were falling in, trying to trap and suffocate him under the rubble. But it was only the breeze outside that stirred the letters and sketches snapping at him. He tore down and stacked them in a corner, wrinkling his nose at the remaining stains on the walls, whatever it was. There weren't any furnishings besides a dingy bedroll in the corner made from a buffalo pelt, its woolly hair shedding in clumps, so only a barren leather remained. He sat down on it, eyeing the stack of papers, begging him to think about the city, the past, everything. The doused moved around outside. His mind started to wander.
"Marlowe!"
cried his mother from the third-floor window of the counselor house.
"Boys! Dinner is ready!"
She waved at her son, no more than 10 years old, down in the fenced pasture overlooking the city. He looked up from his spot in the grass across from another boy, both burning the stalks a piece at a time. They giggled as ash fluttered from their fingers. Marlowe pushed up and offered a hand to his friend, who took it without hesitation.
"Can Doyle stay for dinner?" "Well, do Doyle's parents mind?"
Marlowe looked back at him.
"Is it all right?"
Doyle lowered his head for a moment, nudging his feet in the grass, and looked up with a broad smile.
"Yep, it's fine. They know I'm here." "Then both of you wash your hands and get up here. I made pot roast, cooked it with my own 2 hands.
She closed the window and returned inside. Marlowe and Doyle galloped to the front door, crisping the last few blades of grass like counting flower petals about whether or not their crush liked them. Doyle finished the last of his and looked at his sooty fingers. "Mar, do you think your mom would let me stay over?" "I keep telling you to ask her. If she says no, then we can figure something else out." He went to the door and leapt up to the handle and twisted. A gaunt, shallow-cheeked scarecrow of a man came storming out of the house with a brown bottle clenched in his fist. He looked stunned at the sight of the boys, changing his face to a smile, wiping the corner of his eye like he'd gotten something in it. "Go get something to eat, boys. I'll be back in a little while."
"Where are you going, Dad?"
Marlowe smiled. The man patted his head. "Your mother asked me to go get some, bread for supper. I won't be long." But the droplets in his bottle tempted him to the sky tap singing from downtown. He tugged down his hat and smiled fondly at the kids. "Go on. I'll be back in a snap." He snapped his fingers and tickled Marlowe's belly, who giggled a fit and then left down the trail without another word.
"Your dad is funny,"
Doyle commented when they stepped inside the house. He watched Marlowe take off his shoes and flip them to the ground.
Should I wear something over my feet so I don't track in dirt? Aunt Peggy says the rules are no shoes in the house. You're already not wearing any. He swung his arm at the stairs. Come on, Mom's gonna be pissed if the roast gets cold. How are your hands?
Doyle held them up.
Clean enough.
They giggled and ran up the stairs, admiring the portraits of all the great counselors who returned with grand tales of the dangers outside the city's walls. Titanus, who lived next door to Marlowe and his family on the 3rd floor, poked his nose out from his room as they hurried past.
"Marlowe," he chirped, hiding most of his body behind the door. "I smell something ravishing. Got dinner on?"
Yes, Mr. Titanus, Marlowe waved at him. Want me to bring you some? Or you can come over.
He put up a hand, red and blistered.
"Oh, no, I am more than stuffed. I figured only to pass along my compliments to the chef."
"Oh, that's my mom. I'll tell her you said so."
"Is it really? Didn't figure Helena could control her fire enough to cook so well." "Oh, and Doyle," Titanus said, shifting his gaze to the blonde-headed boy. "How are your folks? Haven't seen them around in a while."
Doyle looked down at his feet.
"They're fine."
"Oh, all right. Good. Well, you boys enjoy that feast that smells so good. Sound like a plan? Don't forget my compliments to the chef, Marlowe."
He smiled with a wink before pushing the door closed. The boys looked at one another, made mocking, goofy faces, and giggled again. They continued down to the last door on the right of the hall. Marlowe got the door for Doyle as they went in. A gust of beefy steam slicked their faces like a slaughterhouse sauna.
"That smells delicious, Marlowe's mom,"
Doyle said, wiping his cheeks. Helena stepped away from the table set with silverware and folded cloth napkins. The roast sat in a juicy stew in the center. Feathery clouds wisped off it. Carrots, celery, and onions colorfully festooned the base of the bronze meat. The boys salivated as they sat at the table.
"Oh yeah, Mom," Marlowe said, unfolding his napkin. "Titanus told me to give his compliments to the chef. He said supper smelled ravishing." "Oh," Helena blushed. "Well, that is awful nice of Mr. Titanus, isn't it?"
She grabbed a pitcher of water and brought it to the table, filling 3 of the 4 glasses. Marlowe set Doyle's napkin in his lap for him.
"Waiting to pour Dad's when he gets back?"
Helena looked back from the window.
"Oh, yes, he just had to step out to get some, bread?"
Doyle said. Her eyes lit up, but she nodded slowly, taking her seat.
"That's right. Dad should be right back, but he said for us to start eating without him." "Thank you again for all this, Marlowe's mom," Doyle said, while his friend served him a slice of roast. "Doyle," she watched her son nearly cut himself and reached for the knife. "Please don't call me Marlowe's mom. That makes me feel old." "Sorry, Mom." Marlowe relinquished the knife and looked at his plate.
Doyle patted his shoulder.
"Okay, Helena," Doyle replied, marveling at the meat she set on his plate. "But you are old, Mom," Marlowe said. She flashed a glance at him. "That's 2, she thought. He was unaware. "Oh, would it be all right if Doyle spent the night?" She pretended to think about it, nodded, and cut another piece. The boys turned to each other and pumped their fists about the ephemeral privilege. They were going to stay up so late, reading terrors by candlelight, running through the streets pretending they were counselors, pranking Aunt Peggy, staying out after curfew, going out when everyone else was inside. The night was theirs, and the sun wasn't even down yet. Helena placed the meat and vegetables on Marlowe's plate before turning to her own. Stephen's plate mocked her from across the table with its barren face, accusing her of things she'd rather not confront at the moment. Not with Marlowe like this. She took a bite. Meat was tough, vegetables undercooked. She didn't say anything the rest of the meal as the boys gushed about how they were going to spend the seemingly endless night together.
"Get up, Mar. Your heat control's improving, but make sure to keep it in your core. Got it? It doesn't get hot enough if you don't focus."
A 12-year-old Marlowe let the glow in his skin simmer. He looked up at his instructor, Proctor Styles. The dark-skinned trainer waved his fingers behind the young counselor in training, beckoning forth another trainee. He pointed at Marlowe.
Get your head in shape, and you'll be fine. The gift of the universal will have a place in you if you allow it." His steely eyes didn't pay with emotion, yet they twinkled with a measly spark when he nodded his head hard like he intended to do better next time. "Good. Go on. Next up." Marlowe trotted over to the group finished with their heat control tests. He turned around and watched the next one in line. Doyle's turn. The blonde-headed rascal strutted up to the proctor and yanked up his shirt, already summoning a soft glow from his milk-fat stomach. The proctor hadn't said anything about starting the test, but Doyle rattled his clenched fists like this was only a warm-up, blowing his cheeks out like a chipmunk before winter. The orange glow seeped out of his core up to his throat, but it was brighter than Marlowe's. By a lot. It flashed and beat like a heart, stretching into his limbs, too. Proctor Styles waved a cautious palm. "That's fine, Doyle. You keep going, and I'll fear for your body." He chuckled. "Come on, that's enough." But Doyle pressed too hard, and the orange morphed up to his face like water in a balloon, and in an instant, the orange blew out his left eye. Fire jetted from the socket, dissolving his eye in a black puff of ash. He fell to his knees and let out a prepubescent scream that sounded like a dying rabbit. Tears poured from his remaining eye, licking down his cheeks, steaming off hot skin. His trembling face looked up at Styles. The proctor reached to Doyle's shoulder and pulled him up. "Medical, Doyle, we have to go. Now!" He tugged the shrieking child by the armpit back toward the city walls. The kids who stayed behind looked at each other, mouths still open. Doyle's cries lingered in the air. Marlowe shook his head out of shock and started after them, but the proctor pointed back and growled at the boy to return to the group, that he could handle this on his own. Marlowe stayed where he was. They disappeared over a hill and into the council's walls while the others remained behind him in the training field. Gossip started almost immediately. He'd never felt so alone as when he looked down at his hands then and saw not even a single spark. The boys, both 13 now, hiked down the zigzagging cliffs overlooking a well-watered pasture. Hills rolled into the edges of the wild grass, teeming with all kinds of bugs and twitching critters. Down the switchback cliff, the boys came into the valley, their eyes filled with wonder at the saturated green field so pure in its natural wilderness. They thought of it as some sort of divine place, a realm of worship and reflection of innocence. For them to explain it, why it was incredible, they would have said they just thought that it was pretty and nice. Marlowe halted before stepping into the comfortable grass. He stuck his arm out to prevent Doyle from bumbling ahead. "Wait, we've got to say a prayer." "To each other?" Doyle asked. "To the nature, you idiot." Doyle frowned and thought to himself. "Can I ask it why I had to lose my eye?" "That's not a prayer. We've got to offer something to sacrifice, like a secret from us to offer the nature." The boys sat on the bone-dry short grass bordering the pasture and thought about what they should think of to commune with the nature. They sat with their legs crossed and eyes closed. Before long, the thoughts became meditations, and the realm opened itself to the boys. When they passed the divide, a gasp of air melted over their heads, blowing back their hair. Marlowe inhaled through his nose, smelling every piece of pollen, millions of blades of grass, and countless breezes in a concentration one could only call intoxicating. It felt as though he began to bleed deep inside his nostrils. Yet there was no pain. It was a pleasant burn. He collapsed to his knees in the field, his hands fishing for fistfuls of chlorophyllic hair. Doyle went on ahead. He was much farther into the valley by the time he called back for his friend. He had found a hare, the gray critter nibbling on shoots of grass. The cycloptic child squatted behind a bush. He licked his lips. The breeze was drying them out. Marlowe hustled up to his friend and sat down. He looked into the nervous boy's eyes. "What are you thinking?" "I want to get that rabbit," his voice squeaked with excitement as he tried to whisper. There was a pause in Marlowe's reply, the kind of pause that one does not make at such a young age. "Have you forgotten where we are?" Doyle flashed his friend a jesting look. "It's just a rabbit. It's a creature of the world. You have to respect everything in nature, Doyle." "But there's so many, though. And this one's so close. What's the big deal if we play with just one?"
He snapped a branch from the bush and tore off the small twigs and leaves. "What's with the stick? You're not going to hurt it." "No, just in case we need it." Doyle peeled some of the bark away and made a sharpened point that he tested with his finger. He crawled out from the bush and inched toward the hare. "Come on, sneak up on the other side of it. I want to trap him." Marlowe yelped after his friend to quit, but it didn't work. He went around to the opposite side of the hare, keeping his body low to the ground, believing he could still get Doyle to listen to reason. When Doyle leapt at the hare, it darted closer to Marlowe, who scared it back to Doyle. They moved in on the animal. "Quit teasing it, Doyle. Come on." "Hey, you started helping me. I'm trying to get you to quit. I'm serious, man. Stop it. I ain't gonna hurt him. Just help me catch him." Doyle dove over the hare. The gray streak sped through the tall grass. It swam blindly through and then headbutted Marlowe's shin, knocking him down. The rabbit went flying backward, and it must have given itself a concussion because the thing started screaming the second it landed on its back. Marlowe's skin crawled at the unholy wailing tearing out from its pink, flashing mouth as he got back on his feet and rubbed his leg. Doyle took his hands off his ears only to jump and sink his stick into the rabbit's white belly. It twitched, legs kicking. The mouth fell open. Its eyes went blurry. The screaming stopped. Doyle let go of the stick and looked at Marlowe, realizing in an instant the horror of what he had done. He scrambled away from the rabbit, snot leaking from his nose. The color dropped from his face. Oh no. Oh shit. No. Why'd I do that? Marlowe! He looked at his friend across the dead hare like he'd awoken from a spell of demonic possession. I didn't mean to do that. You believe me? I don't know why I did that. Marlowe, don't tell anybody. All right? Please? I didn't. I thought I didn't need to. I didn't want. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Mom. Dad, I'm sorry. He melted into a blubbering mess. The black hole in the left side of his face was empty. Marlowe picked up his jaw and rubbed his shin, wincing at the red and purple bruising that was starting. He stood on his tiptoes to get a better look at the bleeding animal in the grass, limped closer until he was standing over it. He knelt and put his hand close to its fur. The thing was still hot. Steam was coming off its coat. A pool of red stained the pelt, mixing with the green of the grass, and the dulled stick stuck unusually deep into its belly. Somewhere deep within his psyche, an itch he'd long had but never knew he'd had been scratched, but something froze him. He decided he wouldn't dare speak of it. Not to anyone. Ever. Not even to his blubbering friend, who could have used a good dose of sympathy at the time. "Oh no, Doyle," he said. "You killed it." "3 years passed since that day, and in that time both boys, along with the rest of their class, had graduated and gone on to fight the drench in the tradition of all counselors. Everyone, that is, except for Doyle, who remained behind after having only gone out once and nearly dying under the first storm he'd found. Those uneventful years he called Doyle days, when he waited for Marlowe to come back by killing time around town, at the Sky Tap, or lying in the grass in one of the parks dotting the city's hills, reading a book to escape from himself. This day had a special air about it, and for the first time since they had graduated, Marlowe was headed out for several moons, rather than somewhere close by for a couple days. "That's why I wanted to talk to you first," Marlowe said to his friend. They sat on a bench in the park. "I don't know how long Selander is going to have me gone, but if it's going to be long, I figured you ought to be the first to know about it." Doyle looked at his feet, at the grass rising up around his shoes. He clasped his hands between his knees, back arched and hair falling over his face. "Not Stephen? He's your father." Marlowe rolled his eyes. "Nah, I hardly ever talk to him anyway." He looked off in the distance, squinting. "Besides, you're more important to me than anyone else is." Doyle flinched with a couple tears he felt compelled to hold back. He always felt like the emotional one in their friendship, and the last thing he wanted to do was confirm that. "I really appreciate you telling me," he said with a quick nod to hide the wetness in his eye. "But I'll be fine. We'll see each other again."
"You don't sound convinced."
"Well," he said, "I know that it won't be forever."
"So you have patience?"
Doyle nodded. "But sometimes that's not enough, Doyle. I know you know that."
Doyle looked in the opposite direction, out at the rolling plains meeting the mountains in the west. Even though he knew they were never coming back, he had hope every time he looked that they'd be there. He felt Marlowe's hand touch his shoulder. He glanced at it. "Sometimes, those we love most leave for reasons we don't understand. But that doesn't mean it's up to us to change that. Sometimes, we're not even the reason for them leaving. It's just life." Doyle squeezed his eye hard and choked back another stinging round in it. A briny tear crept out from under his eyelid that made him wince. "Dee, I know you got a lot to say, so why don't you just say it?" Doyle looked up as he blinked out the tears. A few streamed down his face, clinging to the whiskers starting to grow out of his cheeks. "It's not that I can't wait," he said. Marlowe scooted closer, putting the full reach of his arm around his shoulders. "It's not that I don't know you're coming back. It's just that your trust..." "What about it? Do you not trust me?" He shook his head. "No, I do. That's the problem." "What's bothering you?" He nibbled his lip and sighed. "I don't know if you can trust me." Marlowe retreated, leaning away but still holding on to his friend. "What do you mean by that? Not be able to trust you? Of course I can trust you. Trust you to what? Stay here? Wait for you to get back?" He hung his head as Marlowe's eyes widened at the comment. His back jolted up and down as he heaved a burden off himself and came to terms with how heavy it had been, not feeling the amount of relief he had hoped he would. "My life can't just be waiting to see you again. I need my own passion, my own reason for living. My future. It's not about you. It's me, right?" Marlowe retracted fully at that, feeling now that his comforts were making Doyle uncomfortable. His hands tightened into fists, and he folded his arms and one leg over the other, holding his eyes still on his friend, looking through him more than seeing him. "So, you're going to leave me because I have to do my duty to the council?" "No, Just because I'm capable and you're not, you want to leave me for some wild belief that your parents are still alive out there, like Helena is?" Doyle recoiled, moving farther into his side of the bench, his face shadowed with an appalled expression that let Marlowe know he'd screwed up. "You think I don't have my own life without you? That I can't do something on my own? Well, with all this crying about your missing parents and codependent shit, I just figured I was the light of your life and that you'd be here for me when I came back like you've always been." Doyle jerked up from the bench. Marlowe tried to reach him, but he couldn't. "Don't touch me, Mar. You have no idea what you're talking about. I opened myself up to you. Weaknesses I always had to keep inside for fear of having them exploited. Like this. And then you tell me that I'm weak? And you're not? What about Helena, huh? You're telling me you don't think about her every day since she abandoned you? Don't talk about her like that. You have no idea what she did. Yet you push me about my parents leaving me? We all have wounds, Marlowe. Some are just more obvious than others." Marlowe fell forward and clocked his butt in the mouth, knocking him down hard on his ass. Doyle's eyes rolled as he smacked a hand to his cheek. It started to swell. "You hit me!" Marlowe looked away, arms crossed. "You pushed me to do it." Doyle picked up and dusted himself off. "I was going to say I could go with you when you left.
But I see now what I should have this whole time.
You wouldn't like it out there anyway.
No, I wouldn't, Doyle said, leaving.